You guys, I have been waiting for the day to make this video, and it has finally come. The day is here where we are going to read Bill Gates's book recommendations. Let's get into it. So for those of you who are not familiar, Bill Gates is an avid reader, and I have always admired his reading, but I've never just sat down, watched one of his recommendation videos, and read the books. So today we're going to see how good Bill Gates's book recommendations actually are. So every season or so, about every 3 months, Bill Gates posts a video on his YouTube channel where he recommends like 5 or so books for the season. Now, just a few days ago, he posted his video for summer, and I'm super excited for this. So we are going to see what books he recommends and how daunting this challenge is going to be. Okay, summer reading list. Let's get into it.
The Choice by Dr. Edith Eger. That's a hell of a story. The woman was a 16-year-old girl in Auschwitz. She eventually does survive and gets out, moves to Texas, and becomes this inspirational therapist. And half the book is her story, half is how she helps other people.
So that first book, I don't know. I feel like that is not a book that I would have picked up on my own. Let's see what's next.
Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. It's such an unusual book, and it's clever. You go through 6 different epochs in history where you have people making moral choices, where you see how self-centered and bad people can be and how supportive and good people can be. You really do feel he captures these different worlds.
Okay. I'm going to be honest. That book seems pretty boring to me. I don't know if I'm going to like that book. Next up.
The Ride of a Lifetime.
Oh, I've actually heard of this book.
It's hard to overstate how demoralized and messed up Disney was. Things weren't in great shape when they got rid of Eisner. And I do consider it brilliant of Iger that in an age where networks are not important and you're going to have to go direct to consumer, that you've got to have a critical mass of the greatest content.
This, I believe my husband has actually read before, and I think he said it was really good. So I have pretty high hopes for that book. I like business biographies. I feel like they tend to be pretty approachable and pretty entertaining from my perspective. So yeah, I'm actually pretty excited about that one.
The Great Influenza by John Barry. He explains how infections work and how the immune system works. The 1918 Spanish flu is the first world epidemic where it basically hits the entire world at the same time.
Actually pretty interested in that one. I have read 2 other books about viruses and coronavirus. I made a whole separate video talking about some recommendations for that, but nothing specifically about the 1918 flu. So I'm actually pretty interested to hear about that one. And then finally, the book number 5 is, let's see.
Good Economics for Hard Times by Abhijit, Banerjee, and Esther Duflo. This is the most important book of the group because it really is about what do we know in the field of economics that can take the current divisions and try and do better.
I think that one has the potential to be super interesting, or it could be really boring. We'll see. So let's get started. So I'm going to start with the first book. I'm going to try to go in order of the way he said them. And the first book is The Choice. And luckily, it's on Scribd, so I don't have to pay extra for this book. So this book is 12 hours. I feel like that's pretty good. This book was actually, it's not a new book. It was released in 2017. Yeah, I feel like the reviews are good. It seems relatively accessible. Again, definitely not a book that I would have picked up on my own probably, but I'll follow up when I have a better sense of what this book is and how I feel about it. So a quick check-in. I have just finished reading The Choice by Edith Egar, and I gave it 5 stars. I thought it was really well done. It was inspiring. It made me laugh. It made me cry. It's the kind of book that it's really hard not to give it 5 stars in my opinion. She was a prisoner of war in the concentration camps at Auschwitz for being a Jewish girl. And she is kind of told to be like the Anne Frank who lived, which I think is a pretty apt description. Basically, this is an autobiography of her whole life, from her childhood before her time in the concentration camps, all through that period, all the way up until present day. It was a solid recommendation. I can definitely see why that book was on the list. One thing that she talked about in the book is if I can do it and I can overcome and I can make the choice to have a positive attitude and really take control of my own life, then you can do it too. The only thing I didn't really like about it is I guess I wasn't necessarily expecting to be so much of like an autobiography, and that's really just because I guess I just didn't look into it enough, but I kind of was expecting to have more emphasis on maybe like present day or more like advice. That's kind of what I was expecting, since she is a psychologist, so I was kind of expecting more of that angle on things, but I wasn't disappointed with how it was. So yeah, that was the first book I read, and I will follow up when I'm starting the second one. Okay guys, I just started listening to the second book, which is Cloud Atlas, and I feel like it's really boring so far. Ugh. For some reason, when I saw this, I did not originally realize that this was more of a fiction book. It's not speaking to me, you guys. Like, I'm really not sure if I'm gonna like this, and I don't want to just judge it, like, judge a book by its cover, but the cover, not really speaking to me, okay? So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to listen to the first chapter of the audiobook, which is like 45 or 50 minutes. It's a pretty hefty chapter, and I'm gonna decide if I want to keep going with the book. Again, I feel like I'm judging it a little too harshly up front. Maybe it'll be amazing. This one, it just seems like kind of like an epic fantasy, or like more like a classic. It's kind of like, seems to me like more of a classic book, and it's almost, I think the audiobook is almost 20 hours. So if it turns out to be not that good, then it's gonna be long. So I listened to the first full chapter on Audible, and that was like almost an hour of raw listening time. I listened to it on like double speed, so it was like 25 minutes, but it was like a pretty solid chunky chapter. It like was no little 5-minute chapter. I listened to the whole thing, and I think that I'm going to DNF this book. I feel like I'm kind of chickening out. I mean, here's basically what's going on. So this book is like super old-timey. All of the language and just the way of the writing style is like, I do declare this endeavor is quite pleasant, blah blah blah, like, and which is weird because the book was only written in 2004, but basically it's like pretending to be like this super like historical, old-timey, authentic kind of story. And from what I can tell, basically what it seems like it's about so far is like this explorer person who is traveling to the Hawaiian Islands. It has like come across this tribe of people, and I don't know. I mean, okay, I'm sure my attitude going into this, I didn't think I was gonna like it, and I'm sure that I'm just like spoiling my own experience by having a bad attitude about this book. But even at double speed, it's going to be 9 more hours of listening to time for this book. My heart's not in it. And the next book on the list just seems so much more interesting, which is The Ride of a Lifetime by Bob Iger. You guys, like, I don't think I can continue. I think I'm just gonna try to like recoup my Audible credit and like return the book and just call it a day and just move on, because it's just not happening right now. Okay guys, so I am about halfway through The Ride of a Lifetime. I feel like Bob Iger is just not that likable. Like, here's the thing. Okay, so the book starts out basically with him talking about where he was during the Pulse nightclub shooting, which was a terrible shooting in a Orlando nightclub. And obviously Disney World is in Orlando, so there's, connection there, and basically says as soon as he found out the Pulse nightclub shooting, he was basically just so relieved that the shooting didn't happen at Disney World. And I'm like, that's your reaction to that? Like, I don't know. It kind of rubbed me the wrong way from the very beginning. And then a lot of the book, like he actually kind of like trash talks a lot of people, like other leaders at Disney. So I feel like I'm just not super enjoying it just because of that, because I'm like, I just don't like you that much. But I'll keep you posted. So here are my final thoughts on the ride of a lifetime. I'm kind of on the fence about it. I'm gonna end up with 3 stars for this book. And to be honest, that's pretty disappointing. I had higher expectations for this book, but it just kind of fell flat for me. Number one, I feel like Bob Iger has some questionable things that he talks about in this book that really just didn't sit well with me. Like the whole thing about the Pulse nightclub shooting, that bugged me. He has other instances of like criticizing people that he works with. He has instances of just like really hypocritical behavior. He basically said that during his own wedding, he was distracted on his phone because Disney was going through a major deal or something like that. At his own wedding, he was distracted on the phone. And then he has the nerve to criticize other people that he worked with for being not present or being distracted and taking phone calls in the middle of important things. I'm like, what? Do you hear what you're saying? I thought the book did do a good job at explaining the path, like his professional path and why he made some of the decisions he made at Disney. However, I felt like it was just too focused on the business side of things. I feel like when you read these kind of books, at least for me, I want to get more of a glimpse into the person, into their personality, into more of their like home life and just like more personality, you know what I mean? But I felt like this book really fell flat on that department. It just felt like a very prolonged reading of his resume. I wasn't crazy about it, you guys. So that was unfortunate, but 3 stars for that book.
Generation of American medical scientists. He had spent his life in the laboratory. He already built an extraordinary career and international reputation, and he was still young enough to be seen as just coming in.
So now I am reading The Great Influenza, which is the next book on Bill Gates' reading recommendation list. I think if you've ever read The Devil in the White City, it feels very similar to The Devil in the White City. And I think, so I'm listening to the audiobook and maybe I'm wrong, but it almost seems like it's the same narrator. So maybe that's why I'm thinking that. But here's kind of my thoughts on this book so far. So I've read 4 chapters. So the audiobook I think is like 18 hours. And at this point, I've gotten through like a few hours of it. So far, we have not gotten to the flu yet. It talks about like the whole state of the medical field starting in like the late 1800s. And it's kind of like featuring the key players in that world, in that time. And it's like telling their story. So it seems like it's actually pretty character driven for something that I thought was going to just be more like spewing statistics about the flu of 1918. It's definitely very like academic and it's still like a borderline, like, I don't want to call it boring, but it's like kind of borderline, like still definitely very historical and borderline boring, but still character driven, they're real people, but character driven enough to be interesting. So yeah, I'm going to keep listening to it and I will let you know as I get further into it. So stay tuned. Okay guys, the lighting I feel like is so bright right now. I'm next to my window, but here's the thing. So I just finished The Great Influenza and I ultimately gave it 4 stars. Here is kind of like what my thoughts are on it. So if you were just looking for a book that just gives you the rundown on the 1918 flu, I feel like this book will probably be more than what you are actually looking for. It tells you about the 1918 flu from the perspective of like a few of the key researchers and like scientists during this time. So it starts out several decades prior to the 1918 flu, and it gives you this like whole rundown on what was the medical field like during this time, what was the state of like scientific research, like all this stuff. So you have a lot of context when they start talking about the 1918 flu. That being said, it takes hours of the audiobook before you actually start talking about the flu. And like once you get into that part, I thought it was super interesting. Like the parallels between now and then are crazy. Like you have all this stuff of like the mask wearing campaigns, you had the business closures, you had the people quarantining. And I think what was even crazier is just seeing like how it rose and fell. Like I feel like the 1918 flu just kind of disappeared. It was going, and then all of a sudden it was just like a huge decline after like a year or two. I forget the exact timing, but I thought that part was really cool. However, I feel like what I didn't like about it is I feel like personally I could have gone with like shaving maybe 30% off the audiobook and just focusing more on the 1918 flu part. But yeah, I don't know. Overall though, I think it was definitely worth reading. It definitely had a lot of helpful context. So I would say this is a spot on recommendation from Bill Gates. So yeah, next on the list, let us see what the last book was. I changed my camera setting. Hopefully it looks like slightly better now. I don't know. It's like I don't usually film here, so it's a little weird area for me. But so the last book I have on the list is Good Economics for Hard Times. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not super into reading Good Economics for Hard Times, but I'm gonna start it and hopefully it will be kind of a short one. I don't know. I'm like not totally in the mood to read like a long economics audiobook, but we're gonna do it, my friends. We are going to do it, and I'm gonna let you know how I feel about that book once we are a bit further in it. So stay tuned. I am probably about 75% of the way done through Good Economics for Hard Times. It's a little bit boring. I don't want to be too negative, but it's not the most interesting book I've ever read, and I actually do enjoy books that kind of talk about like economic issues, but it's just feeling a tad bit scattered. Like the chapters are all about like vastly different things, and I don't really know yet what the overarching theme or like takeaway of the book is. Like I think it's definitely talking about some great things, but it's just like I don't know what I'm supposed to take away from it, really. It's talking about a bunch of different things. It's talking about climate change, what economic changes we can do to ameliorate the effects of climate change. It's talking about immigration and how immigration affects the economy, and it's kind of like debunking some myths that some people might have about like economic policies and what actually is a good economic policy. But I feel like the book is just missing a little bit of personality, in my opinion. Like it's like it needs to have more stories. It's just a bit dry. That's really all I have to say about it. Like it's a bit dry. I still have a quarter of it left. I'm listening to the audiobook, so stay tuned.
To a more just and humane world. And for Sasha, who didn't get a chance. To our surprise, they found new news. Economists did not write books, based on all the things we need. And what we normally do, which is to write and publish research papers. Which is what we were doing while the dawn light of the early Obama years.
So I just finished Good Economics for Hard Times, and honestly, my opinion didn't really change that much in the last quarter of the book. I think this book is worth reading if you have like a particular interest in economics and economic issues. I can definitely see why Bill Gates would recommend a book like this. He works a lot in initiatives related to poverty and stuff like that, and so I can see for him like why he would be interested in a book like this. However, this book kind of fell flat for me a little bit. I think the two main problems I had with it is, number one, it felt, as I said, a little too scattered. Like every chapter was on like a wildly different topic. Even after just finishing the book, I don't feel like I have a really clear conclusion or like a clear takeaway. And then on top of that, I felt like the writing was a little dull. Like it was a little, just not that interesting. Like, I feel like they could have really spiced it up with adding more stories of like individual people, or just made it like having a little bit more personality. I think it definitely talked about important things, and the content was very valuable. I mean, obviously they're doing, I think, a lot of great work looking into these topics, but it just, I don't know, it just wasn't really my favorite. So yeah. So here are my key takeaways from this experience reading Bill Gates's book recommendations. So let's just touch base on some of the stats. So there were 5 books. I had 1 DNF, 1 5-star, which was The Choice. I had 1 4-star, which was A Great Influenza, and I had 2 3-stars. So the average of the books that I actually finished was a 3.75 rating. And I think the distribution is not amazing. However, when I actually compared it to all of the books that I've read so far this year, which was 49 books, my average rating was a 3.78. So my Bill Gates reads were a 3.75 average rating. So I would say this is a success. I would definitely look at Bill Gates's book recommendations in the future. Overall, I would say I'm not going to trust Bill Gates's recommendations 100% no matter what, but I think that he definitely does have some good recommendations, and I think if I sort out the ones that are clearly not interesting to me, I think I will be left with ones that will legitimately be things that I'm interested in, that are talking about important topics. Yeah, that is the end of the story. I would love to know, who would you like me to read their book recommendations next? If you know of anyone who has like a clearly defined list of reading recommendations that is easy to follow, I would love to know. Let me know your thoughts and ideas down in the comments. And until next time, bye.